Okay, chapter 3. The tragedy proclaimed as they made their way up the crescent of the drive, no less by the gaping potholes in it than by the tall exotic plants, living and crepuscular through his dark glasses, perishing on every hand of unnecessary thirst. Staggering, it almost appeared against one another, yet struggling like a dying voluptuaries in a vision to maintain some final attitude of potency, or a collective desolate fecundity, the consul thought distantly, seemed to be reviewed and interpreted by a person walking at his side, suffering for him and saying, "Regard, see how strange, how sad, how familiar things be. Touch this trait, once your friend. Alas, that which you've known in the blood should ever seem so strange. Look up at that niche in the wall over there in that house where Christ is still, suffering. Who would help you if you asked him? You cannot help him. Consider the agony of the roses. See on the lawn conceptuous coffee beans. You used to say they were Marias dying in the sun. Do you know their sweet aroma anymore? Regard the plantains with their queer, familiar blooms, once emblematic of life, now of an evil foul of death. You do not know how to love these things any longer. All you love is the continuous now, the feeble survival of a love of life now turned to poison, which only is not holy poison, and poison has become your daily food. We're in the tavern. Has Pedro gone too? Yvonne was holding his arm tightly, but her voice was almost natural, he felt. Yes, thank God. How about the cats? Pedro, the consul, removing his glasses, said amiably to the pariah dog that appeared familiarly at the heel. But the animal covered back down the drive. Though the gardens are raw mess, I'm afraid. We've been virtually without a gardener at all for months. He pulled up a few weeds. He cleaned out the swimming pool today, too. Hear it? It ought to be full. The drive widened to a small area that debouched into a path cutting obliquely across the narrow sloping lawn, islanded by rose beds to the front door, actually at the back of the low white house, which was roofed with imbricated flower pot colored tiles resembling bisected drain pipes. Glimpsed through the trees, with its chimney on the far left, from which rose a thread of dark smoke, the bungalow looked an instant like a pretty little ship lying at anchor. No, skullduggery and suings for back wages had been my lot, and leafcutter ants, several species. The house was broken into one night while I was out, and the flood, the drains of Quannaquack visited us, and left us with something that smelt like the cosmic egg till recently. Never mind, though, maybe you can. Yvonne disengaged her arm to lift aside a tentacle from the trumpet vine growing across the path. Oh, Joffrey, where's my camellias? God knows. The lawn was divided by a dry runnel parallel with the house, bridged by a spurious plank. Between floribundia and arose a spider woven intricate web. With pebbly cries, a convoy of tyrant flycatchers swept over the house in a quick, dark flight. They crossed the plank, and they were on the stoop. An old woman with the face of a highly intellectual black gnome, the consul always thought, mistress to some gnarled guardian of the mind beneath the garden once, perhaps, and carrying the inevitable mop, the trapdoor or American husband over her shoulder, shuffled out of the front door, scraping her feet. The shuffling of the scraping, however seemingly unidentified, controlled by separate mechanisms. Here's Concepta, the consul said. Yvonne, Concepta, Senora Fermin. The gnome smiled a childlike smile that momentarily transformed its face into an innocent girl's. Concepta wiped her hands on her apron. She was shaking hands with Yvonne as the consul hesitated, seeing now, studying with sober interest, though at this point at once he felt more pleasantly tight than any time since just before the blank period last night. Yvonne's luggage on the stoop before him, 3 bags and a hat box so bespangled with labels they might have bust forth into a kind of bloom, to be saying, too, here's your history. Hotel Ilo, Honolulu, Via Carmona, Granada, Hotel Theba, Algeciras, Hotel Peninsula, Gibraltar, Hotel Nazareth, Galilee, Hotel Manchester, Paris, Cosmo Hotel, London, the SS Ile-de-France, Regis Hotel, Canada Hotel, Mexico DF, and now the new labels, the newest blossoms, Hotel Astor, New York, the Townhouse, Los Angeles, SS Pennsylvania, Hotel Mirador, Acapulco, the Compañía Mexicana de Aviación. El otro señor? He was saying to Concepta, who shook her head with delighted emphasis. Hasn't returned yet. All right, Yvonne. I dare say you want your old girl. Anyhow, he was in the back room of the machine. The machine? The mowing machine. Porque no? Agua caliente. Concepta's soft, humorous voice rose and fell as she shuffled and scraped off with 2 of the bags. So there's hot water for you, which is a miracle. On the other side of the house, the view was suddenly spacious and windy as the sea. Beyond the barranca, the plains rolled up to the very foot of the volcanoes into a barrier of murk above which rose the pure cone of old El Popo. And spreading to the left of it, a university city in the snow with jagged peaks. With jagged peaks of Ixtacahuatl. And for a moment they stood out on the porch without speaking, not holding hands, but with their hands just meeting, as though not quite sure they weren't dreaming this, each of them separately on their far bereaved cots, their hands but blown fragments of the memories, half afraid to commingle, yet touching over the howling sea at night. Immediately below them, the small, chuckling swimming pool was still filling from the leaky house connected with a hydrant. Though it was almost full, they had painted it themselves once, a little on the sides and at the bottom. The paint had scarcely faded, and mirroring the sky, aping it, the water appeared a deep turquoise. Hue had trimmed about the pool's edges, but the garden sloped off beyond into an indescribable confusion of briars from which the consul averted his eyes. The pleasant, evanescent feeling of tightness was wearing off. He glanced absently round the porch, which also embraced briefly the left side of the house. The house of Yvonne hadn't yet entered at all, and now, as an answer to his prayer, Concepta was approaching them down its length. Concepta's gaze was fixed steadfastly on the tray she was carrying, and she glanced neither right nor left, neither at the drooping plains, dusty and brown with seed on the low parapet, nor at the stained hammock, nor the bad melodrama of the broken chair, nor the disemboweled daybed, nor the uncomfortable stuffed Quixotes tilting their straw mounts on the house wall, shuffling slowly nearer them with the dust and dead leaves she hadn't yet swept from the rain tiled floor. Concepta knows by habit, you see, the consul regarded the tray now, on which were 2 glasses, a bottle of Johnny Walker, half full, a soda siphon, a jar of melting ice, and the sinister-looking bottle, also half full, containing a dull red concoction like a bad claret. However, this is strike guide. Will you have a whiskey and soda? The ice seems to be for your benefit anyway. Not even a straight wormwood, the consul shifted the tray from the parapet to a wicker table Concepta had just brought out.
Oops.
Good heavens, not for me, thank you. A straight whiskey then. Go ahead. What have you got to lose? Let me have some breakfast first. She might have said yes for once, a voice said in the consul's ear, with incredible rapidity. For now, of course, poor old chap wants you want horribly to get drunk all over again. Don't you the whole trouble being as we see it, that Yvonne's long dream of coming, alas. But put away the anguish, my boy, there's nothing of it, the voice garbled on. Put away the anguish, my boy, there's nothing in it, the voice gabbled on. Has in itself created the most important situation in your life, save one, namely the far more important situation in it, in turn creates of your having to finish 500 drinks in order to deal with it. The voice he recognized of a pleasant and impertinent familiar, perhaps horned, prodigal of disguise, a specialist in casuistry, and who added severely, "But are you the man to weaken and have a drink at this critical hour, Jockey Furman? You are not. You will fight it. Have already fought down this temptation, have you not? You have not. Then I must remind you, you did not last night refuse drink after drink, and finally, after a nice little sleep, you can sober up altogether. You didn't, you did. You didn't, you did. We know afterwards you did. You were only drinking enough to correct your tremor, a masterly self-control she does not and cannot appreciate." "I don't feel you believe in the strike man somehow," the consul said, with quite triumph. There was an intense comfort, however, in the mere presence of the whiskey bottle. Pouring himself from the sinister bottle a half tumbler full of his mixture. "I have resisted temptation for 2.5 minutes at least. My redemption is sure. Neither do I believe in the strike man. You'll make me cry again, you bloody fool, Jockey Furman. I'll kick your face in, oh idiot." There was yet another familiar, and the consul raised his glass in token of recognition and drank half its contents thoughtfully. The strychnine, he had ironically put some ice in it, tasted sweet, rather like cassis. It provided perhaps a species of subliminal stimulus. Faintly perceived. The consul, who was still standing, was aware of a faint feeling ruling of his pain, contemptible. But you can't see, you cabral, that she is thinking that the first thing you think of after she has arrived home like this is a drink, even if it's only a drink of strychnine, the intrusive necessity for which, in the juxtaposition, Cantus is innocence. So you see, you might as well, in the face of such hostility, might you not start on the whiskey instead of later, not on the tequila, where by the beginning of the end, nor on the mezcal, which would be the end of, though a damned good end, but the whiskey, the fine old, helpful throat-snaring fire of your wife's ancestors, Nacio, in 1820, Siguienda Tanca Prende. Yeah, afterwards, you might perhaps have some beer, good for you too, and full of vitamins, and for your brother will be here, and it is just an occasion, and this perhaps the whole point of celebration. Of course it is, and while drinking the whiskey and later the beer, you can nevertheless still be tapering up poco, as you must, but everyone knows it's dangerous to attempt it too quickly, still keeping up Hugh's good work of straightening you out. Of course you would. It was his first familiar again, and the consul put down the tumbler and the tray with a defiantly steady hand. "What was that you said?" he asked Yvonne. "I said 3 times, Yvonne was laughing. "For Pete's sake, have a decent drink. You don't have to drink that stuff to impress me. I'll just sit here and cheer." "What?" She was sitting on the parapet, gazing over the valley, with every semblance of interest and enjoyment. It was dead calm in the garden itself. But the wind must have suddenly changed. Ixta had vanished while Popo was almost wholly obscured by black horizontal columns of cloud, like smoke drawn across the mountain by several trains running parallel. Will you say that again? The consul took her hand. They were embracing, or so it all but seemed, passionately. Somewhere, out of the heavens, a swan, transfixed, plummeted to earth. Outside the cantina, El Puerto del Sol and Independencia, the doomed men would already be crowding into the warmth of the sun, waiting for the shutters to roll up with a crash of trumpets. No, I'll stick to the old medicine, thanks. The consul had almost fallen backwards onto his broken green rocking chair. He sat soberly facing Yvonne. This was the moment, then. Yearned for under beds, sleeping in the corners of bars, at the edge of darker woods, lances, bazaars, prisons, the moment when. But the moment, stillborn, was gone, and behind him the Ursa Auriflis of the night had moved nearer. What had he done? Slept somewhere, that much he was certain. Okay. No, I'll stick to the old medicine, thanks. The consul had almost fallen backwards onto his broken green rocking chair. He sat soberly, facing Yvonne. This was the moment, then. Yearned for under beds, sleeping in the corner of bars, at the edge of dark woods, lanes, bazaars, prisons. The moment when, but the moment, stillborn, was gone, and behind him the Ursa Horribilis of the night had moved nearer. What had he done? Slept somewhere, that much was certain. Tack, talk, help, help. The swimming pool ticked like a clock. He had slept. What else? His hand searched his dress trousers pockets, felt the hard edge of a clue. The card he brought to light said, Arturo Diaz Vigil, médico cirujano y paterno, enfermedades de niños, indisposiciones nerviosas, consultas de 12 a 2 y de 4 a 7. Avenida Revolución número 8. Have you really come back, or have you just come to see me? The consul was asking Yvonne gently as he replaced the card. Here I am, aren't I? Yvonne said merrily, even with a slight note of challenge. Strange, the consul commented, half trying to risk for the drink Yvonne had ratified in spite of himself, in the quick voice that protested. You bloody fool, Geoffrey Furman. I'll kick your face in if you do. If you have a drink, I'll cry. Oh, idiot. Yet it's awfully courageous of you. What if... I'm in a frightfully jolly mess, you know. But you look amazingly well, I thought. You've no idea how well you look. The consul had absurdly flexed his biceps, feeling them. Still strong as a horse, so to speak. Strong as a horse. How do I look? She seemed to have said. Yvonne averted her face a little, keeping it in profile. Did I say? The consul watched her. Beautiful. Brown. Had he said that? Brown as a berry. You've been swimming, he added. You look as though you've had plenty of sun. There's been plenty of sun here too, of course, he went on. As usual, too much of it, in spite of the rain. Do you know, I don't like it. Oh, yes, you do, really, she had apparently replied. We could get out in the sun, you know. Well, the consul sat on the broken green rocker facing Yvonne. Perhaps it was just the soul, he thought, slowly emerging out of the strychnine into a form of detachment, to dispute with Lucretius, that grew older, while the body could renew itself many times until it had acquired an unalterable habit of age. And perhaps the soul thrived on its sufferings, and upon the sufferings he had inflicted on his wife, her soul had not only thrived, but flourished. Ah, and not only upon the sufferings he had inflicted. What of those for which the adulterous ghost named Cliff, he imagined, always as just a morning coat and a pair of striped pajamas opened at the front, had been responsible? And the child, strangely named Joffrey too, she had had by the ghost, 2 years before her first ticket to Reno, and which would now be 6, had it not died at the age of as many months as many years ago, of meningitis in 1932, 3 years before they themselves had met and been married in Granada, Spain. There Yvonne was at all events, bronzed and youthful and ageless. She had been at 15, she told him. That is, about the time when she must have been acting those Western pictures, and Laurel, who had not seen them, adroitly assured one he had influenced Eisenstein or somebody. A girl of whom people said, she is not pretty, but she is going to be beautiful. At 20 they still said so, and at 27 when she married him, it was still true, according to the category through which one perceived such things, of course. It was equally true of her now, at 30, that she gave the impression of someone who was still going to be, perhaps just about to be, beautiful. The same tilted nose, the small ears, the warm brown eyes, the clouded now and hurt looking, the same wide, full-lipped mouth, warm too and generous, the slightly weak chin. Yvonne's was the same fresh, bright face that could collapse, as he would say, like a heap of ashes, and be gray. Yet she was changed. Ah, yes, indeed. Much as the demoted skipper's lost command, seen through the barroom window lying out in harbor, is changed. She is no longer his. Someone has doubtless approved her smart slate blue traveling suit. It had not been he. Suddenly, with a quietly impatient gesture, Yvonne pulled her hat off, and shaking her brown sun-bleached hair, rose from the parapet. She settled herself on the daybed, crossing her usually beautiful and aristocratic long legs. The daybed emitted a rending guitar crash of chords. The consul found his dark glasses and put them on almost playfully, but it had struck him with remote anguish that Yvonne was still waiting for the courage to enter the house. He said consularly in a deep, false voice, "Hugh ought to be here before very long if he comes by the first bus." "What time is the first bus?" 10:30, 11. What did it matter? Chimes sounded from the city. Unless, of course, it seemed utterly impossible, one dreaded the hour of anyone's arrival unless they were bringing liquor. What if there had been no liquor in the house, only strychnine? Could he have endured it? He would be even now stumbling through the dusty streets in the growing heat of the day after a bottle, or have dispatched Concepta. In some tiny bar at a dusty alley corner, his mission forgotten, he would drink all morning, celebrating Yvonne's coming while she slept. Perhaps he would pretend to be an Icelander, or a visitor from the Andes or Argentina. Far more than the hour of Hugh's arrival was to be dreaded the issue that was already bounding after him at the gate of Goethe's famous church bell in pursuit of the child truant from church. Yvonne twisted her wedding ring round her finger once. Did she still wear it for love, or for one of the two kinds of convenience, or both? Or, poor girl, was it merely for their benefit? The swimming pool ticked on. Might a soul bathe and be clean, or slake its drought? It's still only 8:30. The consul took off his glasses again. "Your eyes, you poor darling, they've got such a glare," Yvonne burst out, and the church bell was nearer. Now it had loped, clanging, over a stile, and the child had stumbled. A touch of the gougers, just a touch. De Glock tant nicht mehr. The consul traced a pattern on one of the porch tiles with his dress shoes, in which his sockless feet, sockless not because, as Signor Bustamante, the manager of the local cinema, would have it, he drunk himself into a position where he could afford no socks, but because his whole frame was so neuritic with alcohol he found it impossible to put them on, felt swollen and sore. They would not have, but for the strychnine, damn the stuff, and this completely cold, ugly sobriety it had let him down into. Yvonne was sitting on the parapet again, leaning against a pillar. She bit her lip, intent on the garden. "Geoffrey, this place is a wreck. Mariana and the moated grange isn't in it." The consul was winding his wristwatch. "But look here, suppose for the sake of argument you abandon a besieged town to the enemy, and then somehow or other, not very long afterwards, you go back to it. There's something about my analogy I don't like, but never mind, suppose you do it. Then you can't very well expect to invite your soul into quite the same green graces, with quite the same dear old welcome here and there, can you? But I didn't abandon, even, I wouldn't say, if that town seems to be going about its business again, though in a somewhat stricken fashion, I admit, and its trams running more or less on schedule." The consul strapped his wristwatch firmly on his wrist. "Eh? Look at the red bird on the tree twigs, Geoffrey. I never saw a cardinal as big as that before." "No." The consul, all unobserved, secured the whiskey bottle, uncorked it, smelled its contents, and returned it to the tray gravely, pursing his lips. "You wouldn't have, because it isn't a cardinal." "Of course that's a cardinal. Look at its red breast. It's like a bit of flame." Yvonne, it was clear to him, dreaded the approaching scene as much as he, and now felt under some compulsion to go on talking about anything until the perfect and appropriate moment arrived. That moment, too, when, unseen by her, the awful bell would actually touch the doomed child with its giant, protruding tongue and hellish Wesleyan breath. There, on the hibiscus. The consul closed one eye. "He's a coppery-tailed trogon, I believe, and he has no red breast. He's a solitary fellow who probably lives way off in the canyon of the wolves over there, away from those other fellows with ideas, so that he can have peace to mediate about not being a cardinal. I'm sure it's a cardinal and lives right here in this garden. Have it your own way." Trogon ambiguous is the exact name, I think. The ambiguous bird. Two ambiguities ought to make an affirmative, and this is it. The copper-tailed trogon, not the cardinal. The consul reached outward toward the tray for his empty strychnine glass, but forgetting midway what he proposed to put in it,
or whether it wasn't one of the bottles he wanted first, if only to smell, and not the glass. He dropped his hand and leaned still further forward, turning the movement into one of concern for the volcanoes. He said, "Old Papa ought to be coming out again pretty soon." He seemed to be completely obliterated in spinach at the moment. Yvonne's voice quivered. The consul struck a match against their old jest for the cigarettes he had somehow failed to place between his lips. After a little, finding himself with a dead match, he put it in his pocket. For a time they confronted each other like two mute, unspeaking forts. The water still trickling into the pool, God, how deadeningly slowly, filled the silence between them. There was something else. The consul imagined he still heard the music of the ball, which must have long since ceased, so that this silence was pervaded as with the stale thudding of drums. Pariah. That meant drums too. Petillon. It was doubtless the almost tactile absence of music, however, that made it so peculiar the tree should be apparently shaken to it, an illusion investing not only the garden but the plains beyond, the whole scene before his eyes, with horror, the horror of an intolerable unreality. This must be not unlike, he told himself, what some insane person suffers at these moments when sitting benignly in the asylum grounds. Madness suddenly ceases to be a refuge and becomes incarnate in the shattering sky and all its surroundings, in the presence of which reason, already struck dumb, can only bow the head. Does the madman find solace in such moments, as his thoughts like cannonballs crash through his brain, in the exquisite beauty of the madhouse garden, or of the neighboring hills beyond that terrible chimney? Hardly, the consul felt. As for this particular beauty, he knew it dead as his marriage, and as wilfully slaughtered. The sun shining brilliantly now on all the world before him, its rays picking out the timberland of Popo as its summit like a gigantic surfacing whale, shouldered out of the clouds again. All this could not lift his spirit. The sunlight could not share his burden of conscience, of sourceless sorrow. It did not know him. Down to his left, beyond the plantains, the gardener at the Argentinian ambassador's weekend residence was slashing his way through some tall grasses, clearing the ground for a badminton court. Yet something about this innocent enough occupation contained a horrible threat against him. The broad leaves of the plantains themselves, drooping gently, seemed menacingly savage as the stretched wings of pelicans, shaking before they fold. The movements of some more little red birds in the garden, like animated rosebuds, appeared unbearingly jittery and thievish. It was as though the creatures were sensitive wires to his nerves. When the telephone rang, his heart almost stopped beating. As a matter of fact, the telephone was ringing clearly, and the consul left the porch for the dining room where, afraid of the furious thing, he started to speak into the receiver. Then, sweating into the mouthpiece, talking rapidly, for it was a trump call, not knowing what he was saying, hearing Tom's muted voice quite plainly, but turning his questions into his own answers, apprehensive lest at any moment boiling oil pour into his eardrums or his mouth. "All right, goodbye. Oh, say, Tom, what was the origin of that silver rumor that appeared in the papers yesterday, denied by Washington? I wonder where it came from. What started it? Yes, all right, goodbye. Yes, I have. Terrible. Oh, they did? Too bad. But after all, they own it. Or don't they? Goodbye. They probably will. Yes, that's all right. That's all right. Goodbye. Goodbye." Christ. What does he want me to ring him up at this hour of the morning for? What time is it in America? Erickson 43. Christ. He hung up the receiver the wrong way and returned to the porch. No Yvonne. After a moment he heard her in the bathroom. The consul was guiltily climbing the Calle Nicaragua. It was as if he was toiling up some endless staircase between houses, or perhaps even old Popeye itself. Never had it seemed such a long way to the top of this hill. The road with its tossing broken stones stretched on forever to the distance like a life of agony. He thought, 900 pesos is 100 bottles of whiskey, is 900 ditto tequila. Argol. One should drink neither tequila nor whiskey but mezcal. It was hot as a furnace, too, on the street, and the consul sweated profusely. Away, away. He was not going very far away, nor to the top of the hill. There was a lane branching to the left before he reached Jacques' house. Leafy. No more than a cataract at first, then a switchback, and somewhere along that lane to the right, not 5 minutes' walk, at a dusty corner, waited a little, cool, nameless catena, with horses probably tethered outside, and a huge white tomcat sleeping below the counter, whom a whiskerando would say, "Hey, I'll work all night, mister, and sleep all day." and this cantina would be open. This is where he would be going. The lane was plainly in sight now, a dog guarding it, to have in peace a couple of necessary drinks unspecified in his mind, and be back again before Yvonne had finished her bath. It was just possible, too, of course, that he might meet, but suddenly the Kai Nicaragua rose up to meet him. The consul lay face downward on the deserted street. "Hugh, is that you, old chap, lending the old boy a hand? Thank you so much. For it is perhaps indeed you turn to these days to lend a hand. Not that I haven't always been delighted to help you. I was even delighted in Paris that time you arrived from Aden in a fix over your carte d'identité at the airport. You so often seem to prefer traveling without, and whose numbers I remember to this day is 21312. It perhaps gave me all the more pleasure in it that it served a while to take my mind from my own tangled affairs, and moreover proved to my satisfaction, though some of my colleagues were even then beginning to doubt it, that I was still not so divorced from life as to be incapable of discharging such duties with dispatch. Why do I say this? Is it in part that you should see that I also recognize how close Yvonne and I had already been brought to disaster before your meeting? Are you listening, Hugh? Do I make myself clear? Clear that I forgive you, as somehow I've never wholly been able to forgive Yvonne, and that I can still love you as a brother and respect you as a man. Clear that I would help you ungrudgingly again. In fact, ever since Father went up into the White Alps alone and failed to return, though they happened to be the Himalayas, and more often than I care to think, these volcanoes remind me of them, just as the valley does the valley of the Indus, and those old turban trees intact so do of the Srinagar, and just as so Jamilo. Are you listening, Hugh? Of all the places when I first came here, it reminded me of those little houseboats on the Shalimar you cannot remember, and your mother, my stepmother, died. All those dreadful things seemed to happen at once, as though in-laws of catastrophe had suddenly arrived from nowhere, or perhaps a damn chalk, and moved in on us bag and baggage. There had been all too little opportunity to act, so you say, as a brother to you. Mind you, I have perhaps acted as a father, but you were only an infant then, and seasick upon the P&O, the old erratic coconata. But after that, and once back in England, there were too many guardians, too many surrogates in Harrogate, too many establishments and schools, not to mention the war, the struggle to win which, for as you say rightly, it is not yet over. I continue in a bottle, and you with the ideas I hope may prove less calamitous to you than did our fathers to him. Or for that matter, mine to myself. However all this may be, still there, Hugh, lending a hand? I ought to point out in no uncertain terms that I never dreamed for a moment such a thing as did happen would or could happen. That I had forfeited Yvonne's trust did not necessarily mean she had forfeited mine, of which one has a rather different conception, and that I trusted you goes without saying. Far less could I have dreamed you would attempt morally to justify yourself on the grounds that I was absorbed in a debauch. There are certain reasons, too, to be revealed only at the day of reckoning, why you should not have stood in judgment upon me. Yet I am afraid, are you listening, Hugh, that long before that day, what you did impulsively and have tried to forget in the cruel abstraction of youth will begin to strike you in a new and darker light. I am sadly afraid you may indeed, precisely because you are a good and civil person at bottom, and genuinely respect more than most the principles and decencies that might have prevented it, fall heir as you grow older and your conscience less robust, to a suffering on account of it more abominable than any you have caused me. How may I help you? How ward it off? How shall a murdered man convince his assassin he will not haunt him? Ah, the past is filled up quicker than we know, and God has little patience with remorse. Yet does this help? What am I trying to tell you? That I realize to what degree I brought all this upon myself. Help that I am admitting, moreover, to have cast Yvonne upon you in that fashion was a feckless action, almost, I was going to say, a clownish one, inviting in return the inevitable bladder on the brain, the mouthful and heartful of sawdust. I sincerely hope so. Meanwhile, however, old fellow, my mind, staggering under the influence of the last half-hour's strychnine, of several therapeutic drinks before that, of the numerous distinctly untherapeutic drinks with Dr. Vigil before that, you must meet Dr. Vigil. I say nothing of his friend Jacques Laurel, to whom for various reasons I have hitherto avoided introducing you. Please remind me to get back my Elizabethan plays from him. Of the 2 days and 1 night's continuous drinking before that, of the 777.5, but why go on? My mind, I repeat, must somehow, drugged though it is, like Don Quixote avoiding a town invested with his abhorrence because of his excesses there, take a clear cut around. Did I say Dr. Vigil? I say, what's the matter here? The English King's Parade's voice, scarcely above him. called out from behind the steering wheel. The consul saw now of an extremely long, low cart pull up beside him, murmurous, an MG Magna, or some such. Nothing. The consul sprang to his feet, instantly sober as a judge. Absolutely all right. Can't be all right. You were lying right down in the road there. What? The English face, now turned up towards him, was rubicund, merry, kindly, but worried. Above the English striped tie, mnemonic of a fountain in a great court. The consul brushed the dust from his clothes. He sought for wounds in vain, but there was not a scratch. He saw the fountain distinctly. Might a soul bathe there and be clean, or slake its drought? All right, apparently, he said. Thanks very much. But damn it all, I say, you were lying right down on the road there. Might have run over you. There must be something wrong. What? No? The Englishman switched his engine off. I say, haven't I seen you before or something? Trinity. The consul found his own voice becoming involuntarily a little more English. Unless, Caius. But you're wearing a Trinity tie, the consul remarked with a polite note of triumph. Trinity? Yes, it is my cousin's, as a matter of fact. The Englishman peered down his chin and tie, his red, merry face becoming a shade redder. We're going to Guatemala. Wonderful country this is. Pity about the oil business, isn't it? Bad show. Are you sure there's no broken bones or anything, old man? No, there are no bones broken, the consul said, but he was trembling. The Englishman leaned forward, fumbling for the engine switch again. Sure you're all right? We're staying in the Bella Vista Hotel, not leaving until this afternoon. I could take you along there for a little shut-eye. Deuce nice pub, I must say, but deuced awful row going on all night. I suppose you were at the ball. Is that it? Going the wrong way, though, aren't you? I always keep a bottle of something in the car for an emergency. No, not Scotch. Irish. Burke's Irish. Have a nip? Perhaps you... Ah, the consul was taking a long draught. Thanks a million. Go ahead, go ahead. Thanks, the consul handed back the bottle. A million. Well, cheerio, the English restarted his engine. Cheerio, man. Don't go lying down in roads. Bless my soul, you get run over or run in or something, damn it all. Dreadful road, too. Splendid weather, isn't it? The Englishman drove away up the hill, waving his hand. If you're ever in any kind of jam yourself, the consul cried after him recklessly. Wait, here's my card. Bungo! It was not Dr. Vigil's card the consul still held in his hand, but it was certainly not his own. Compliments to the Venezuelan government. What was this? The Venezuelan government will appreciate. Wherever could this have sprung from? The Venezuelan government will appreciate an acknowledgement to the Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores, Caracas, Venezuela. Well now, Caracas, well, why not? Erect as Jim Taskerson, he thought. Married now, too, poor devil, restored. The consul glided down the calle Nicaragua. Within the house, there was the sound of bathwater running out. He made a lightning toilet. Intercepting Concepta, though not before he had added a tactful strychnine to her burden, with the breakfast tray, the consul, innocently as a man who had committed a murder while dummy at bridge, entered Yvonne's room. It was bright and tidy. A gaily colored Oaxacan serape covered the low end of the bed where Yvonne lay half asleep with her head resting on one hand. How? How? A magazine she'd been reading dropped to the floor. The consul, inclined slightly forward over the orange juice and ranchero eggs, advanced boldly through a diversity of powerless emotions. Are you comfortable there? Fine, thanks. Yvonne accepted the tray, smiling. The magazine was the amateur astronomy one she subscribed to, and from the cover the huge domes of an observatory, haloed in gold and standing out in the black silhouette like Roman helmets, regarded the consul waggishly. The Mayas, he read aloud, were far advanced in observational astronomy, but they did not suspect a Copernican system. He threw the magazine back on the bed and sat easily in his chair, crossing his legs, the tips of his fingers meeting in a strange calm, his strychnine on the floor beside him. Why should they? What I like, though, are the vague years of old Mayans, and their pseudo-years. Mustn't overlook them. And their delicious names for all the months. Pop, Uo, Zip, Zotz, Dek, Tul, Yaxin, Mac. Yvonne was laughing. Isn't there one called Mac? There's Yax and Zach, and Oyeb. I like that one most of all, the month that only lasts 5 days. In receipt of yours dated Zip the 1st. But where does it all get you in the end? The consul stepped to the strychnine that had yet to prove its adequacy as a chaser to the Burke's Irish, now perhaps in the garage at the Bella Vista. The knowledge, I mean. One of the first penances I ever imposed on myself was to learn the philosophical sections of War and Peace by heart. That was, of course, before I could dodge about in the rigging of the Kabbalah like a St. Jago's monkey. But then the other day I suddenly realized that the only thing I remembered about the whole book was that Napoleon's leg twitched. Are you going to eat anything yourself? You must be starved. I partook. Yvonne, who was herself breakfasting heartily, asked, How's the market? Tom's a bit fed up because they've confiscated some property of his in Taxala, or Puebla. He thought he'd gotten away with it. They haven't my number yet. I'm not sure where I really do stand in that regard, now that I've resigned the service. So by the by, I must apologize for still being in these duds. Dusty, too, bad show. I might have put a blazer on, at least for your benefit. The consul smiled inwardly at his accent, now becoming for undivulgeable reasons almost uncontrollably English. So you really have resigned? Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking of becoming a Mexican subject, of going to live among the Indians, like William Blackstone. But for one's habit of making money, don't you know, all the very mysterious to you, I suppose, outside looking in. The consul stared round mildly at the pictures on the wall, mostly watercolors by his mother depicting scenes in Kashmir, a small stone enclosure encompassing several birch trees, and a taller poplar was Lalla Rookh's tomb. A picture of wild torrential scenery, vaguely Scottish, the gorge, the ravine at Guggenveer. The Chamalier looked more like the Cam than ever. A distant view of the Nanga Parbat from the Sindh Valley could have been painted on the porch here. Nanga Parbat might have passed for the old Popo. Outside looking in, he repeated, the result of so much worry, speculation, foresight, alimony, seigniorage. But Yvonne had laid aside her breakfast tray and taken a cigarette from her own case beside the bed, and lit it before the consul could help her. One might have already done so. Yvonne lay in bed smoking. In the end, the consul scarcely heard what she was saying, calmly, sensibly, courageously, for his awareness of an extraordinary thing was happening in his mind. He saw in a flash, as if these were ships on the horizon, under a black lateral abstract sky, the occasion for desperate celebration. It didn't matter that he might be the only one to celebrate it. Receding, while at the same time coming closer, what could now only be what was, good God, his salvation. Now, he found he had said gently, but we can't very well go away now, can we? What with Hugh and you and me, and one thing and another, don't you think? It's a little unfeasible, isn't it? For his salvation might not have seemed so large with menace, had he not the Burke's Irish whiskey chosen suddenly to tighten, if almost imperceptibly, a screw. It was the soaring of this moment, conceived of as continuous, that itself felt threatened. Isn't it? I'm sure Hugh'd understand, but that's not quite the point. Geoffrey, this house has become somehow evil. I mean, it's rather a dirty trick. Oh, Jesus. The consul slowly assumed an expression intended to be slightly bantering and at the same time assured, indicative of a final consular sanity. For this was it. Gertrude's church bell was looking him straight between the eyes. Fortunately, he was prepared for it. I remember a fellow I helped out in New York once, he was saying with apparent irrelevance. In some way, an out-of-work actor he was. Why, Mr. Fearman, he said, it isn't natural here. That's exactly how he pronounced it. Natural. Man wasn't intended for it, he complained. All the streets are the same as this 10th or 11th Street in Philadelphia, too. The consul could feel his English accent leaving him and that of a Bleecker Street murmur taking his place. But in Newcastle, Delaware, now that's another thing going on. Old cobbled roads. And Charleston, old southern stuff. But oh my God, this city, the noise, the chaos, if I could only get out, if I only knew where you could get to. The consul concluded with passion, with anguish, his voice quivering. With passion, with anguish, his voice quivering. Though as it happened, he had never met any such person, and the whole story had been told him by Tom. He shook violently with the emotions of the poor actor. What's the use of escaping? He drew the moral with complete seriousness from ourselves. Yvonne had sunk back into bed patiently, but now she stretched forward and stabbed at her cigarette in the tray of a tall gray tinwork ashstand shaped like an abstract representation of a swan. The swan's neck had become slightly unraveled, but it bowed gracefully, tremulously at her touch as she answered, All right, Geoffrey, suppose we forget it until you're feeling better. We can cope with it a day or two, when you're sober. But good Lord! The consul sat perfectly still, staring at the floor while the enormity of the insult passed into his soul. As if he were not sober now. Yet there was some elusive subtlety in the impeachment that still escaped him. For he was not sober. No, he was not. Not at this very moment he wasn't. But what had that to do with a minute before, or half an hour ago? And what right had Yvonne to assume it? Assume either that he was not sober now, or that, far worse, in a day or two he would be sober. And even if he were not sober now, by what fabulous stages, comparable indeed only to the paths and spheres of the holy Kabbalah itself, had he reached this stage again? Touched briefly once before this morning, the stage at which alone he could, as she put it, cope. This precarious, precious stage, so arduous to maintain, of being drunk in which alone he was sober. What right had she, when he had sat suffering the tortures of the damned in the madhouse on her behalf for fully 25 minutes on end, without having a decent drink, even to hint that he was anything but, to her eyes, sober? Ah, a woman could not know the perils, the complications, yes, the importance of a drunkard's life. From what conceivable standpoint of rectitude did she imagine she could judge what was anterior to her arrival? And she knew nothing whatever of what all too recently he had gone through. His fall in the Caya Nicaragua, his aplomb, coolness, even bravery there. The Burke's Irish whiskey, what a world. And the trouble was she had now spoiled the moment, because the consul now felt he might have been capable, remembering Yvonne's "perhaps I'll have one after breakfast," and all that implied, of saying in a minute, but for her remark, and yes, in spite of salvation, "Yes, by all means you are right, let us go." But who could agree with someone who was so certain you were going to be sober the day after tomorrow? It wasn't as though either, upon the most superficial plane, it were not well known that no one could tell when he was drunk. Just like the Taskersons, God bless them, he was not the person to be seen reeling about in the street. True, he might lie down in the street, if need be, like a gentleman, but he would not reel. Ah, what a world it was that trampled down the truth and drunkards alike. A world full of bloodthirsty people, no less. Bloodthirsty. Did I hear you say bloodthirsty, Commander Freeman? But my lord, Yvonne, surely... Oh, but my lord, Yvonne, surely you know by this time I can't get drunk however much I drink, he said almost tragically, taking an abrupt swallow of the strychnine. Why, do you think I like swilling down this awful nux vomica, or belladonna, or whatever it is of Hugh's? The consul got up with his empty glass, began to walk around the room. He was not so much aware of having done by default anything fatal, it wasn't as if he'd thrown his whole life away, as someone merely foolish, and at the same time, as it were, sad. Yet there was a call for some amends. He either thought or said, "Well, tomorrow perhaps I'll drink beer only. There's nothing like beer to straighten you out, and a little more strychnine, and then the next day beer. I'm sure no one will object if I drink beer. This Mexican stuff is full of vitamins, I gather. For I can see it really is going to be somewhat of an occasion, this reunion of us all. And then perhaps when my nerves are back to normal again, I'll go off it completely. And then, who knows?" He brought it by the door. "I might get to work again and finish my book." But the door was still a door, and it was shut, and now ajar. Through it, on the porch, he saw the whiskey bottle, slightly smaller and emptier of hope than Burke's Irish, standing forlorn and lonely. Yvonne had not opposed a snifter. He had been unjust to her. Yet, was that any reason why he should be unjust also to the bottle? Nothing in the world was more terrible than an empty bottle, unless it was an empty glass. But he could wait, yes, sometimes he knew when to leave it alone. He wandered back to the bed, thinking or saying, "Yes, I can see the reviews now. Mr. Freeman's sensational new data on Atlantis. The most extraordinary thing of its kind since Donnelly. Interrupted by his untimely death. Marvelous. And the chapter on the alchemists, which beat the Bishop of Tasmania to a frazzle. Only that's not quite the way they'll put it. Pretty good, eh? I might even work in something about the Coxcox and Noah. I've got a publisher interested too, in Chicago. Interested but not concerned, if you understand me, for it's really a mistake to imagine such a book could ever become popular. But it's amazing when you come to think of how the human spirit seems to blossom in the shadow of the abattoir. How, to say nothing of all the poetry, not far enough below the stockyards to escape altogether the reek of porterhouse of tomorrow, people can be living in cellars, the life of old alchemists of Prague. Yes, living among the cohabitations of Faust himself, among the litharge and agate and hyacinth and pearls, a life which is amorphous, plastic, and crystalline. What am I talking about? Copula maritalis, or from alcohol to alkahest. Can you tell me? Or perhaps I might get myself another job, first, of course, being sure to insert an advertisement into the Universal. I will accompany Corpse to any place in the East. Yvonne was sitting up, half reading her magazine, her nightgown slightly pulled aside, showing where her warm tan faded into the white skin of her breast. Her arms outside the covers, and one hand turned downward from the wrist, hanging at the edge of the bed listlessly. As he approached, she turned this hand palm upward in an involuntary movement, of irritation perhaps, but it was like an unconscious gesture of appeal. It was more. It seemed to epitomize suddenly all the old supplication, the whole queer, secret, dumb show of incommunicable tenderness and loyalties and eternal hopes of their marriage. The consul felt his tear ducts quicken, but he had also felt a peculiar sense of embarrassment, a sense almost of indecency that he, a stranger, should be in her room. This room! He went to the door and looked out. The whiskey bottle was still there. But he made no motion toward it. None at all, save to put on his dark glasses. He was conspicuous of new aches here and there, of, for the first time, the impact of the Calle Nicaragua. Vague images of grief and tragedy flickered in his mind. Somewhere a butterfly was flying out to sea, lost. La Fontaine's duck had loved the white hen, yet after escaping together from the dreadful farmyard through the forest to the lake, it was the duck that swam, the hen, following, drowned. In November 1895, in convict dress, from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 1:30, handcuffed, the recognized Oscar Wilde stood on the central platform at Clapham Junction. When the consul returned to bed and sat down on it, Yvonne's arms were under the covers while her face was turned to the wall. After a while, he said with emotion, his voice ground hoarse again, "Do you remember how the night before you left, we actually made a date like a couple of strangers to meet for dinner in Mexico City?" Yvonne gazed at the wall. "You didn't keep it." "That was because I couldn't remember the name of the restaurant at the last moment. All I knew was that it was in the Via Dolorosa somewhere. It was the one we discovered together the last time we were in the city. I went into all the restaurants in the Via Dolorosa looking for you and not finding you. I had a drink in each one." Poor Joffrey. "I must have phoned back the Hotel Canada from each restaurant, from the cantina of each restaurant, God knows how many times, for I thought you might have returned there. And each time they said the same thing, that you'd left to meet me, but they didn't know where. And finally they became pretty damn annoyed. I can't imagine why we stayed at the Canada instead of the Regis. Do you remember how they kept mistaking me there, with my beard, for that wrestler? Anyhow, there I was wandering from place to place, wrestling, and thinking all the while I could prevent you from going the next morning, if only I could find you." Yes. If only you could find her. Ah, how cold it was that night, and bitter, with a howling wind and wild stream blowing from the pavement gratings, where the ragged children were making to sleep early under their poor newspapers. Yet none was more homeless than you, as it grew later and colder and darker, and still you had not found her, and a sorrowful voice seemed to be wailing down the street as you with the wind calling its name, Via Dolorosa, Via Dolorosa. And then somehow it was early the next morning, directly after she had left the Canada. You brought one of her suitcases down yourself, though you didn't see her off. And you were sitting in the hotel bar drinking mescal with ice in it that chilled your stomach. You kept swallowing the lemon pips, when suddenly a man with the look of an executioner came from the street, dragging 2 little fawns, shrieking with fright, into the kitchen. And later you heard them screaming, being slaughtered probably, and you thought, better not remember what you thought. And later still, after Oaxaca, when you had turned here to Conahuac, through the anguish of that return, circling down from Tres Marias in the Plymouth, seeing the town below the mist, and then the town itself, the landmarks, your soul dragged past them as the tail of a runaway horse, when you returned here. "The cat has died," he said, when I got back. Pedro insisted it was typhoid, or rather, poor old Oedipus died the very day you left, apparently. He'd already been thrown down the barranca, while little Pathos was lying in the garden under the plantains when I arrived, looking even sicker than when we first picked her out of the gutter, dying, though no one could make out of what. Maria claimed it was a broken heart. "Cheery little matter," Yvonne answered with a hard, lost tone, her face still turned to the wall. "Do you remember your song? I won't sing it. No work has been done by the little cat. No work has been done by the big cat. No work has been done by anyone." The consul heard himself ask. Tears of sorrow came to his eyes. He removed his dark glasses quickly and buried his face on her shoulder. "No, but Hugh," she began. "Never mind, Hugh." He had not meant to elicit this, to thrust her back against the pillows. He felt her body stiffen, become hard and cold. Yet her consent did not seem from weariness only, but to a solution for shared interest. For one shared instant, beautiful as trumpets out of a clear sky. But he could feel now, too, trying the prelude, the preparatory nostalgic phrases on his wife's senses. The image of his possession, like that jeweled gate, the desperate neophyte, Yesod bound, projects for the 1000th time on the heavens to permit passage of the astral body, fading and slowly, inexorably, that of the cantina, when in dead silence and peace it first opens the morning, taking its place. It was one of those cantinas that would be opening now, at 9 o'clock, and he was clearly conscious of his own presence there, with the angry, tragic words, the very words which might soon be spoken, blaring behind him. This image faded also. He was where he was, sweating now, glancing once, but never ceasing to play the prelude, the little one-figured introduction to the unclassifiable composition that might still just follow, out of the window of the drive, fearful himself lest Hugh appear there, that he imagined he really saw him at the end of it coming through the gap, now that he distinctly heard his step in the gravel. No one. But now he wanted to go. Passionately he wanted to go, aware that the peace of the cantina was changing to its first fervid preoccupation of the morning. The political exile in the corner discreetly sipping orange crush. The accountant arriving. Accounts gloomily surveyed. The ice block dragged by a brigand with an iron scorpion. The one bartender slicing lemons, the other, sleep in his eyes, sorting beer bottles. And now he wanted to go, aware that the place was filling with people not at any other time part of the cantina's community at all. People eructating, exploding, committing nuisances, lassos over their shoulders, aware too of the debris from the night before, the dead matchboxes, lemon peel, cigarettes open like tortillas, the dead packages of them swarming in filth and sputum. Now that the clock over the mirror would say a little past 9, and the news vendors of La Prensa and El Universal were stamping in, or standing in the corner at this very moment before the crowd grimed mingitorio, with the shoe blacks who carried their shoe stools in hands, or had left them balanced between the burning footrail and the bar. Now he wanted to go. None but he knew how beautiful it all was. The sunlight, flooding the bar of El Puerto del Sol, flooding the watercress and oranges, or falling in a single golden line as if in the act of conceiving a god, falling like a lance straight into a block of ice. Sorry, it isn't any good, I'm afraid. The consul shut the door behind him, and a small rain of plaster showered on his head. A Don Quixote fell from the wall. He picked up the sad strong knight. And then the whiskey bottle. He fiercely drank from it. He had not forgotten his glass, however, and it was into it now, pouring himself chaotically a long drink of his strychnine mixture. Half by mistake, he'd meant to pour the whiskey. Strychnine is an aphrodisiac. Perhaps it will take immediate effect. It still may not be too late. He had sunk, though. It almost fell, the green cane rocking chair. He just managed to reach his glass, left on the tray, and held it now in his hands, weighing it, for he was trembling again, not slightly but violently, like a man with Parkinson's disease or palsy, unable to bring it to his lips. Then, without drinking, he set it on the parapet. After a while, his whole body quaking, he rose deliberately and poured, somehow, into the other unused tumbler Concepta had not removed, about a half-quartern of whiskey. Nacio 1820 y siguiendo tan campante. Siguiendo. Born 1896 and still going flat. I love you, he murmured, gripping the bottle with both hands as he replaced it on the tray. He now brought the tumbler filled with whiskey back to his chair and sat with it in his hands, thinking. Presently, without having drunk from this glass either, he sat on the parapet next to his strychnine. He sat watching both glasses. Behind him in the room, he could hear Yvonne crying. Have you forgotten the letter to Geoffrey Firmin? The letters she wrote till her heart broke? Why do you sit there trembling? Why do you not go back to her now? She will understand after all. Hasn't it always been that way towards the end? Perhaps you could laugh at this. Perhaps you could laugh at it. Why do you think she's weeping? It is not for that alone. You have also done this to her, my boy. The letters. You do not only never have answered them. You did. And then where is your reply? But have never really read. Where are they now? They are lost, Geoffrey Firmin. Lost or left somewhere. Even we do not know where. The consul reached forward and absent-mindedly managed a sip of whiskey. The voice may have either been of his familiars or, hello, good morning. The instant the consul saw the thing, he knew it was a hallucination, and he sat, quite calmly now, waiting for the object shaped like a dead man, and which seemed to be lying flat on its back by the swimming pool, with a large sombrero on its face, to go away. So the other had come again, and now gone, he thought, but no, not quite. There was still something there, in some way connected to it, or here at his elbow, Or behind his back, in front of him now too. No, that too, whatever it was going. Perhaps it had only been the coppery-tailed trogon stirring in the bushes, his ambiguous bird that was now departing quickly on creaking wings, like a pigeon once it was in flight, heading for its solitary home in the Canyon of Wolves, away from people with ideas. Damn it, I feel pretty well, he thought suddenly, finishing his half-quartern. He stretched out for the whiskey bottle, failed to reach it, rose again, and poured himself another finger. My hand in the glass and the bottle of Johnny Walker, which is fuller than he imagined. Oh, my hand is much steadier already. He finished this whiskey, and taking the glass and the bottle of Johnny Walker, which was fuller than he imagined, crossed the porch to its furthest corner and placed them in the cupboard. There were 2 old golf balls in the cupboard. Play with me, I can still carry the 8th green in 3. I'm tapering off, he said. What am I talking about? Everyone knows I'm being fatuous. I shall sober up. He returned and poured some more strychnine into the other glass, filling it, then moved to the strychnine vial from the tray to a more prominent position on the parapet. After all, I've been out all night. What could one expect? I'm too sober. I've lost my familiars, my guardian angels. I'm straightening out, he added, sitting down again opposite the strychnine bottle with his glass. In a sense, what happened was a sign of my fidelity, my loyalty. Any other man would have spent this last year in a very different manner. At least I have no disease, he cried out. The cry seeming to end on a somewhat doubtful note, however. And perhaps it's fortunate I've had some whiskey, since alcohol is an aphrodisiac too. One must never forget either that alcohol is a food. How can a man be expected to perform his marital duties without food? Marital? At all events, I'm progressing, slowly but surely. Instead of immediately rushing out of the Bella Vista and getting drunk, as I did the last time all this happened, we had that disastrous quarrel about Jacques, and I smashed the electric light bulb. I have stayed here. True, I had the car before and it was easier, but here I am. I am not escaping. And what's more, I intend to have a hell of a sight better time staying. The consul sipped his strychnine, then put his glass on the floor. The will of man is inconquerable. Even God cannot conquer it. He lay back in his chair. Ixtan Popo, the image of the perfect marriage, lay now clear and beautiful on the horizon under an almost pure morning sky. Far above him, few white clouds were racing windily after a pale gibbous moon. Drink all morning, they said to him. Drink all day. This is life. Enormously high, too, he noticed some vultures waiting, perhaps more graceful than eagles, as they hovered there like burnt papers floating from a fire, which suddenly are seen blowing swiftly upward, rocking. The shadow of an immense weariness stole over him. The consul fell asleep with a crash.